Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths from our studios here in northern Indiana. We want to thank you for joining us as we bring you the latest in what's going on with the global pandemic and its impact to the agricultural industry. We also want to thank some new viewers today on LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get straight to some of the headlines today. The new May Rural Main Street Index is out. That says nearly 3 of 4 banks have had to restructure loans. The overall index for the month decreased to 12.5. That's up from April's low of 12.1, but it's still down significantly from March's 35.5. Now, to give you a little perspective, 50 represents growth neutral for the index. Bank CEOs say they expect farm loan defaults to expand by 5.4% over the next 12 months. 100% of bankers surveyed are calling the federal Paycheck Protection Plan a success. Many support expanding it. Meanwhile, new weekly jobless claims are in, with the first-time claims totaling 2.4 million this week. That's still elevated, but it's at a declining pace from previous weeks. That brings the total filings during this coronavirus pandemic to 38.6 million. However, the total has fallen for 7 straight weeks now from its record peak of nearly 7 million people during 1 week back in late March. Hardly any industry, or I would say no industry, has been harder hit than the food and restaurant industries. We now have Sean Kennedy, the Executive Vice President, Public Affairs for the National Restaurant Association. And Sean, it's no secret that the restaurant industry and workers have really felt the pain from this pandemic.
Clinton, it's been really tough. You think that the restaurant industry was one of the first industries to be shut down at the state level. We are such a social facing industry, which becomes ironically our biggest vulnerability right now. The job loss numbers and the revenue loss numbers are staggering. 8 million jobs lost in the restaurant sector, $80 billion in lost revenue for March and April. And we are on a path right now, even as we reopen slowly, to lose over $240 billion in revenue. And as the nation's second largest private sector employer, that needs to be pretty alarming to policymakers in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. We know some of the folks from the Restaurant Association, the restaurant industry, were in Washington visiting with the president this week, having a roundtable and discussing the importance of that industry and how to stabilize it going forward. What were the key takeaways from that discussion?
We appreciate President Trump holding that restaurant roundtable at the White House on Monday, brought together leaders from small restaurants to chains to some of the fine dining options, so really caught the full range. The message he heard was pretty consistent, that the restaurant industry is uniquely suffering. 2 out of every 3 restaurant workers today are home, unemployed, and they have a very uncertain future. The Paycheck Protection Program is a great start. The way it's designed doesn't work for the restaurant industry. We're not asking for more money for the fund. We're just asking to change the way that we can spend the dollars in the most effective way possible so we can open our doors, start buying supplies from your viewers, and get things going into normal operation as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the keys and one of the main reasons, obviously, we wanted to have you on and talk about this is because the food that we're producing is where it's ending up. It's ending up with your restaurants. Talk about that supply chain. How has that been working? And have we seen any major changes as we start to reopen here?
Well, it's a good point. So far, generally, what's probably one of the biggest changes that you've seen from customers and from restaurants have been, obviously, as we're opening in a limited capacity, able to only offer takeout and delivery. We've been doing things to provide a little more revenue. And one of those has been actually to start selling groceries. So you can buy that loaf of bread from your to go with your Italian meal, but you could also get flour and eggs and milk so you could make your own loaf of bread the next day if you like. We found it's been incredibly popular with customers. It's something that I could really see it's continuing to be another outlet for food supply and for customers moving forward once we're able to reopen fully.
Sean, it's interesting because I've got family out in New Mexico that were doing just that, going to a local restaurant that had, these excess products that they were willing to put in a bag, drop in your car and sell. And it was that able to bridge a little bit of a gap for some of these operations?
Well, you're right. It's a good point. If you have a nice rental space that's got 60 tables in it and you're not allowed to use them, there's not enough takeout and delivery business that you can do that's going to bring in that revenue for you to cover your fixed costs like rent and utilities, insurance. So it could be anything from cocktails to go, where you get a margarita with your Mexican takeout meal, or the groceries, as you note. anything that allows these restaurants to get a little more revenue could be the difference between making it for another month and giving the keys back to the bank and turning everything in.
So how do we start to turn the tide here? Have we started to see anything improve as we have more and more of these states start to talk about easing some restrictions, opening back up a little bit? Are we starting to see some of this business return?
So virtually every state has at least begun to outline a path to allow reopening of businesses, including restaurants. But now is actually ironically when we're going to be at our most dangerous period. You take a state like Louisiana, they're going to offer 25% capacity. Once you turn on the lights in that restaurant and you bring on enough employees to even just to serve 25% of your customer base, you're now losing, ironically, more money. You're not going to make enough money from that 25% to offset the labor costs of bringing folks in. What we're asking for ultimately is there needs to be a restaurant recovery fund that's tailored for the nation's second largest industry. If your viewers would like to learn more about how they can add their voice, we have a website, restaurantsact.com. We've been hyper engaged with Congress just to make sure that they recognize that we're not only the second largest private sector employer, we've lost more jobs than anyone else, but we are such a critical part of the food supply chain from agriculture on down. Every restaurant that goes down is one less customer for a lot of folks that really need, that's the last thing we need right now.
You know, we've heard it as pain points and from a lot of different corners of agriculture, from potatoes not being sold as French fries to milk not being served as cheese or in a restaurant. Every different sector of agriculture has been touched by the restaurant industry because, well, we eat 50% of our meals were outside of the home before this all started. Obviously, that's changing, and we don't expect it to come back right away. Have you seen any supply chain issues? Maybe from the protein sector as we start to ramp back up?
We are being really mindful of it. So far, beyond the beef issues and constraints, we are not seeing large-scale problems with supply chain that are a concern to us. At the same time, Clinton, a lot of restaurants are going to be reducing the size of their menus to try to make things more simple. Fewer dishes means fewer chefs to prepare it. So as we start ramping up, we're going to be watching that a little more closely. But so far, we feel like things are pretty good. Okay.
I know we talked about the conversation at the White House. You talked about the Paycheck Protection Program. What would you like to see different? How can that help you?
So right now, the Paycheck Protection Program requires it's basically a loan that can be forgivable if you spend it on payroll. You have to spend it in 8 weeks, 8 weeks after you get the loan. And for a lot of restaurants, they are closed right now, or they are barely open. And it's really tough to take out a loan to pay people who are not going to be coming into the restaurant. What we're looking for is more flexibility. Once the government allows us to reopen, once we have something approaching business as usual, we're going to want to bring on as many people as we can to serve as many customers as we can. So we just want to extend the period of time that we can spend those dollars, spend that loan in a way that makes more sense for the business cycle of your average restaurant. Keep in mind, this is day 65 that restaurants have been closed down. The average restaurant has 16 days of cash on hand. So every day, the May rent is due right now. June is just a couple of weeks away. Every day, restaurants are making a lot of tough decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a big, important part of our overall ag economy. Again, give us that website where folks can go and kind of talk a little bit or learn a little bit more about what you all are doing.
Restaurantsact.com has information state by state on what the restaurant closures are like, a little bit of guidance on how we're looking on reopening, and then most importantly, it has information so that your viewers can add their voice to Washington that says we need a restaurant-specific solution here in Congress.
Sean Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs for the National Restaurant Association. Great stuff there. You know, farmers are planting a crop all over the country, and in Iowa, they've got 96% of the corn in the ground, 86% of the soybeans. As part of our I-80 planning tour, Michelle Rook talked with some farmers in western Iowa, many that have been done planting for almost 2 weeks now.
Some farmers here in the Western Corn Belt have already wrapped up planting for 2020 after barely turning a wheel at the same time last year. In fact, Iowa farmers planted the crop in record time, including Kevin Ross, who finished up his last field of soybeans May 11th.
You know, a lot of folks are getting done before Mother's Day, and hearing a lot of people say that's the first time they've ever done that, or just, you know, everybody's way ahead of schedule, especially compared to the last couple of years for sure.
John Tarks farms in western Iowa, and his seed dealership covers about 60,000 acres. He says last year was one of the slowest planting seasons in the state. This year, it was one of the fastest.
To get the beans and the whole 9 yards in the ground as quick as we did, it's been record pace. Never seen anything this quick before.
Mother Nature was more cooperative this spring, and farmers pushed hard with the challenges of 2019 still fresh in their minds.
Spring 2020 around southwest Iowa was like no spring we probably ever had. Just go, 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 no rain days. Or the rain days we get have been 2 to 3 tenths, and by the afternoon you're back in the field. Even
last year's prevented plant acres are getting seeded.
I know they were real shocked, especially the Missouri River bottom, at how well that cleaned up and was you know, dried out. And a lot of guys got in there in a real hurry too.
Generally, a fast planting season entices more corn acres, but Ross says not this year on his farm with the low prices.
We switched some acres to beans and changed a few of those extra corn on corn, what would be corn on corn acres for me.
Crop emergence has been slow in the western Corn Belt with the cold weather, and the recent sub-freezing temperature several mornings caused only minimal damage to what crop was up.
We had more soybeans planted this year early than we've ever seen by a very wide margin. That's the crop we're most concerned about, but it's really spotty.
However, another weather concern that's ironically starting to get attention in western Iowa is the dryness, as the area was abnormally dry in the last drought monitor.
We just need some moisture. We've just had way too long a period of 2 and 3 tenths rains that just, you know, are kind of more of a nuisance than anything that really help us right now.
Yet farmers are still optimistic the early start will provide some big yields at harvest. In Iowa, I'm Michelle Rook reporting for Ag Day.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And if you'd like to keep up with the latest coverage from our entire Farm Journal team, you can do that by going to agweb.com. And for the latest on the coronavirus pandemic, agweb.com/coronavirus. Thanks again for joining us on Farm Journal Live. I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great afternoon. It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on.